I've come to believe that the narrative that our kind of modern culture has created around women's periods is really not what most of history has seen, and it's really not what's going on. So this idea that it's a mess, it's a nuisance, the bleeding is something to cover up or to be ashamed about or not talk about. Really, it's actually one of the most extraordinary things that a woman can do, not just physically in her body, but also for her life journey and her growth throughout life. I think back to, my teens and 20s and even early 30s, and I would just stick a tampon in and keep going about life. I wasn't really sure where I was in my cycle. It would kind of sneak up on me. My periods were pretty light, and I would just, I'd keep going to the gym. I'd keep my full schedule and just kind of just not put any attention to it. During the pandemic in 2020, when all of us were sheltering in place, I was asking myself what I wanted to learn or do with that time being at home. And I decided to learn more about my menstrual cycle. And I wish I remembered exactly how it came to me or who brought it into my life, but I do know that it was a large part of it was wanting to know what was going on with me because I was having a lot of emotional swings and ups and downs and feeling very different, very extreme in different moments during my months. The book by Miranda Gray, The Optimized Woman, came to me, and she talks about the different moments, the different weeks and different moments in a woman's cycle. And she dedicates a whole piece to bleeding. And she talks about how we are shedding. It's the time for us where we're physically shedding our bodies, shedding the endometrial tissues in our bodies and, renewing and saying, okay, we're not making a baby this month. And we're literally physically cleansing out. I don't want to say cleansing like cleansing toxins, but making space for shedding, releasing in our bodies. And she also talks about how this is a time for us to be shedding in other areas of our lives, shedding resentments and frustrations, shedding people and projects that don't serve us anymore. Really creating this moment to reflect and let go of patterns, habits that we no longer need, or at least bringing them up to for review. This idea of shedding and review and ultimately renewal, after the bleeding, has also been talked about. Actually, there's a lot of people who have written about this, both men and women. The idea or concept that women have a naturally built-in self-generating, shedding and then renewal / growth mechanism within our bodies. So the period is seen as this monthly moment where we are able to grow. And that men don't have this built-in mechanism in their bodies. So throughout history, we've created rituals, male rituals, for men to mostly go through suffering or difficult things in order to become a man. A lot of women have written about this, and also a lot of men have written about this, both from kind of both sides, both perspectives. And, when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, of course, because, you think about teenagers, and a young woman might, inherently know to not put herself in a, dangerous situation, get in a car with somebody who's driving drunk or something like that. But the boys, the teenage boys, they need to have something really bad happen to them in order for them to really learn. And I wonder, as I say this, there's a lot of talk these days about the difficulties that young men are going through in society, and I would say even older men, and not knowing their purpose or place in the world, not being able to connect with people, not growing to spiritually or bettering themselves on their own. And I wonder, because the last couple generations have grown up in such a way that there's a lot less suffering than there has been before, and also not as many rituals that we used to have, because a lot of people are not involved with a church or other community groups, Boy Scouts or anything like that. So I wonder if there's young men are not going through this ritual and this suffering at a young age that pushes them to grow into men. Just something to think on. Again, there's a lot of people who have written on this. This is not my just my point of view. But I wonder, I do know that there are also several books out there about what's happening with young men, these days. So something to consider. But going back to a woman's cycle and this shedding and renewal, I thought it was really interesting that when we shed the uterine lining of the endometrial cells from our uterus each month, that those endometrial cells are some of the only tissues in the body that don't scar. So a woman will have her period about 400 times in a lifetime, and every time we're not creating a scar in place of what we lost. They actually fully renew, and I see this then as, while we are shedding, it's like we're not removing something from us, but we're renewing. Like there's an opportunity for renewal there. Yeah, I think that's cool. I think that's very interesting to think about what's physically happening in a woman's body, and then what the potential implications are of that in our emotional, spiritual worlds, our life paths, our growth over decades. Yeah, very cool. A woman's time of bleeding has been talked about in history as well. In the Indian tradition, any of this downward and releasing movement of, detoxifying our bodies or shedding or getting rid of things is called apanavayu. And that refers to, or that's referencing as well, a woman's bleeding time. And they actually prescribed women to rest. They were prescribed rest and time for reflection and being together and meditation. And because this is the time where, again, we're getting rid of things and creating space for something new. We have a lot of kind of witchy qualities. This is a really good time for meditation or writing or kind of contemplating on new ideas, not building the idea, but contemplating new ideas. We also historically are aligned with the moon. The men have a hormonal cycle that is with the sun, so daily. And women, as we know, have a 28 to 30 day cycle, typically, more or less. And the moon moves through a 28-day cycle. And unlike the sun, which is always shining, the moon waxes and wanes throughout the month. Just like a woman's body is waxing as it's building these endometrial tissues and then wanes and releases the tissues. The word, all of the words align as well. Menses, menstruation, month, and moon all come from the same root word in Latin. Well, generally, over history, women have bled either on the full moon or the new moon. Now with modern technology and sleeping with street lights outside, artificial light and stuff, and also of course hormonal birth control or birth control in general, a lot of us don't bleed with the moon. But if you were to go, live in a quiet place in the woods and put your feet on the earth every day and eat food from your garden, you would definitely your cycle would start cycling with the moon, where you're either bleeding on the full moon or the new moon. Miranda Gray talks about kind of two moments in your life, or two phases in your life, different phases in your life that you may go in and out of, where sometimes you're bleeding on the new moon and sometimes you're bleeding on the full moon. And when you're bleeding on let me see if I get this right. When you're bleeding on the new moon, that means that you are in this kind of mystical, healer, more kind of crone archetype, wisdom, wise person, teacher phase of your life. So that might be where you're working on expanding a project or healing people or building a business or things like that. And when you're doing the opposite, where you're bleeding on the red moon, on the new moon, then that is when you're in this fertile mother, taking care of the community, motherly time. Like, probably it'd be interesting to see some data on this, but probably a large majority of women who get pregnant, it's when they're on that cycle of when they're in their kind of motherly phase. So we can go in and out of those phases, and I've actually seen myself do that. And since reading that book and since learning about the phases of the menstrual cycle, I remember at least 2 times, maybe 3 times, where very markedly over the course of just a couple months, my menstrual cycle completely changed to where I was bleeding on the full moon instead of the new moon, or vice versa. And it was really cool to experience that, because I got to see, think about, it can be an indicator of kind of what my mission is at that moment in my life. So in thinking about our bleeding, our periods as a cleanse, here are a few things that I have implemented in my life since learning about the different phases of the hormones and what's going on at different times in my menstrual cycle. When I'm bleeding, the first 2 or the heaviest 2 days of my cycle, I don't go to the gym. I spend most of my time at home. I just try and kind of slow down. I will read. It's a really good time for reflection, meditation if you like meditation, or whatever your version of meditation is. Maybe it's like doing a watercolor or Sudoku or something, and just being in this kind of like reflective state. Really good for writing. I use period panties so that I can freely bleed without having anything inside of me. Of course, if I'm gonna on day 3 or whatever, if I'm going out for a long time or I'm going to the beach or something, I'm gonna use an organic, non-bleach, non-pesticide tampon. But and then I really eat kind of warm and cozy foods. It's really good to move your body because, yes, we're releasing things, and movement really helps us to release it. Also, in the days coming up to the period, just making sure to move my body, I do that. But on those days, the day before I get my period and the first couple of days, I'm not going to the gym. I'm not doing anything pushing myself hard and intense. And this also can be a time where I'm not that sociable, and while I'm having a lot of thoughts and ideas and things, it's more of a reflection time. And so I do my best to not schedule things where I'm going to need to be in front of a whole bunch of people, or really be sociable or extroverted. What else do I do? And so I always know where I am in my cycle. We'll do an episode on all of the phases that Miranda Gray and others have. We'll use the Miranda Gray framework, but the different phases and what's going on in our menstrual cycle during there's 4 phases that she speaks about. because we have different, again, like examples, we're more extroverted and can push ourselves more at different times in our cycle than others, where we might be a little bit more inward and reflective, for instance, and lower energy. So we'll look at that. But specifically during this phase when I'm bleeding, yeah, I'm just like taking care of myself, being reflective, looking at things I want to let go, or reviewing things that maybe, conversations that need to be had, or patterns that I'm not sure if I, love, or habits that I, again, it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just kind of this review of life. So I really cherish those days. I'll wear like really cozy stuff, or like a robe, and just, I know that I'm very fortunate also to be able to do that, working from home. And but yeah, just like, even if you have a lot of obligations at that time, like what can we do to kind of soften that? Again, like just like eating warm foods, having tea at night, moving the meeting to a few days later or a few days before. Probably a few days later would be better. Just like not adding unnecessary stuff. Or even if it's just like journaling or sitting, like finding a little bit of silence in the day, each day, just as you're starting or just as you're ending the day or something, to really get to rest during this time. Because I definitely have felt for myself, and I think this is something that people write about as well, that when I push through and kind of ignore my bleeding, I don't have the rest and renewal that I need for what comes next. Because the phase just after your period is a very high energy, high action, like you can get a lot done kind of phase. And I always want to take advantage of that. So the more that I can kind of rest and slow down and reflect during my period, the more energy I will have for what comes next. I do think, and not just do I think, but I know that there's been research done and a lot of people talking about where heavy periods come from. I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but a lot of it comes from inflammation. There's nothing, in general, it's not, and inflammation can come from many different places. Typically it's like in food, processed sugars, maybe an intolerance that you have from food, certainly from chemicals, especially hormone disrupting chemicals, like things that have perfumes in them, or phthalates, it's mostly beauty products and things that you use to clean your home. And fragrances, like literally like spraying fragrances. Heavy metals, plastics, parasites, bacteria, all of these things that are clogging up our bodies are also causing inflammation. And that is what contributes to a heavy period. So like resting during the bleeding time, I think helps a lot with that. Hydrating before coming into your period as well. Starting to eat warmer foods, like not like cold salads and super cold drinks and stuff. Starting to do that before, like the week before you have your period. And low inflammation foods, cutting out processed sugars and things like that. And those are kind of first steps. We talk a lot about, the whole channel is about, cleansing and making our bodies lighter. So also deeper things like supporting your liver and bile production, and getting rid of parasites and heavy metals and things, of course, will help a lot with heavier periods. But those are some of the kind of things that we can start to do now and this month, that should help a little bit with having easier periods. And then I think also, the emotional side of things or the life side of things, So if we're thinking about bleeding as this moment to shed and let go of the things that are no longer serving us, you know, are there struggles, tensions in your life? Are you being inauthentic in a certain area? Are you in a relationship, any kind of relationship that isn't really serving you anymore, or where there's an important conversation that hasn't been had? Are we, you know, like what is zapping our energy or like taking our energy from us that might cause us to brace and like our nervous systems to brace or cause tension within us that then would make it difficult for us to relax and release so that we can shed, you know, smoothly during our bleeding time. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff about the menstrual cycle. I will definitely cover a lot more around that. I think it's just a really magical time for women and I think we can really get a lot out of it when we support our bodies and know where we are in our cycles and honor those few days of bleeding every month. Okay, see you in the next video.